My name is Ruby, and I was once called the shame of the family, right before I saved our family company from bankruptcy with a deal worth nearly $500,000. None of them knew the name at the bottom of that investment agreement belonged to the same girl they kicked out for refusing to follow family tradition. They didn't know, because for the past 6 years, I'd been living under the radar, building a tech empire that empowered thousands of artisans without a single college degree. And when they were begging for an investor to rescue the company, I walked into the boardroom as the investor. Have you ever been called a failure? Until you became the only one they needed. Leave a comment below, hit like and subscribe if you believe real worth doesn't come from approval, but from how you rise after being dismissed. That's how my story began. I grew up in a 3-story red brick house at the end of an old street in Ashton Falls, Oregon, where everything was preserved like time itself had to bow before the unshakable rules of the Wells family. My father, Robert Wells, was the kind of man everyone in town respected. His suits were always pressed to perfection, and his voice had the rhythm of a speech rehearsed for a prestigious council. He ran Wells & Co., our family corporation, known for handcrafted goods. Ceramics, woodwork, weaving. To him, every pottery vase was a crystallization of history, and every rug pattern was the breath of cultural heritage. My mother, Susan Wells, was cold in a different way. She managed every ritual, every order, every color palette, and every traditional contract with old artisan families. She ran the household like a boutique business. Every meal, every afternoon tea, every ribbon tied on a birthday box was orchestrated with a level of precision that made it hard to breathe. And my brother, Mason, well, he was the golden child. Even as a kid, he was the perfect heir in their eyes. He sat with impeccable posture at dinner, could recite the history of Northwestern pottery kilns by the time he was 10. He was always seated at the main table during family events. I was usually on the edge, near the kitchen. Whenever Mason spoke at board meetings, my father would nod proudly. A grandson of Everett Wells never disappoints. I didn't fit their mold. At 8 years old, I was already dismantling old hard drives in the garage, playing with circuit boards, while my parents were teaching Mason how to tell the difference between white oak and walnut. I was secretly learning Python through a hidden YouTube account on Mom's old iPad. She found out only because I forgot to close the screen and left behind a half-written line of code. Ruby, why are you learning this? I wanted to build a website for the ladies who sell baked goods at the weekend market. They don't really know how to go online, so I thought. She didn't let me finish. Those kinds of people aren't our customers, and you won't be managing this estate if you keep chasing silly dreams. That night, I quietly deleted the code and shoved my notebook into the bottom drawer. As I closed it, Mason walked by and smirked. You're the only Wells who knows how to use a computer. Shame no one here needs that skill. I didn't respond. I was used to those kinds of jabs. What I wasn't used to was the invisibility. The feeling that I was merely a guest in the home where I'd been raised. At 14, I secretly fixed the neighbor's Wi-Fi and built a website for her small cake shop. 3 weeks later, she made her first online sale. When she came over to thank me with a fruit tart, my father stood at the end of the hallway, silently watching. Just as I was about to smile, he snapped. Don't turn yourself into some low-level computer repair girl. That's not what this family stands for. I clenched the tart so hard the filling burst onto my shirt. At every family gathering, when the Wells clan met at the ancestral home, I'd hear things like, Mason's taking over next year, you know. He's already attending the state's craft symposiums. And Ruby? She's still figuring herself out, I guess. I'd force a smile every time, swallowing it all. Both the dismissed dreams and the quiet ache of never being enough in the eyes of those who raised me. Dad always said, tradition is core. Innovation is a luxury for the established. I believed that once, until I realized it wasn't that I didn't have a place in this family. It's that the mold they built never had a space shaped like me. And when I finally said, I don't want to run the company, what followed wasn't silence. It was exile. No discussion, no hesitation. Just a sentence. Leave. Because I didn't want to be someone else's copy. I remember the day my dad placed the college acceptance letter on the breakfast table, between untouched scrambled eggs and a glass of orange juice. The red seal from the prestigious School of Business still faintly stamped on the folded sheet, like a verdict on the rest of my life, if I obeyed. It's settled, Ruby. Business administration. You'll start in the spring, he said. Never even asked if I agreed. I choked on a bite of toast, staring at the name New Westbrook like it was a prison sentence. I'd applied to a software engineering program at a small public college in Portland, but that application was never submitted. Mom later admitted she pulled it to keep the family record clean. I didn't scream. But in my head, every line of code I'd written, every draft website I'd ever designed flashed like pieces of a life that wasn't allowed to exist. I knew that if I stayed, they'd always have to be hidden. I moved into a dorm at New Westbrook on a freezing February afternoon. Tiny room, low ceiling, window overlooking an unkempt lawn. I didn't make friends, didn't join student groups, didn't party. I created a new email account, started reaching out to small craft shops I'd followed since high school, a wool rug store in Idaho, a pottery studio in Santa Fe, an elderly woman who sold beeswax candles in Vermont. I offered to help them sell online, build websites, manage orders, and only take a commission if they made sales. While my classmates studied Apple case studies, I was learning to code at night, hunched in the dim library light, trying to finish the first version of a platform I called Artisan Link. I still remember the night I came home for my first summer break. My parents were already seated in the living room. The TV screen showed a copy of my early transcript and an email from the university. Ruby Wells had officially withdrawn, by personal request, no plans to return. Explain, my father said, voice like stone. I stood tall. My hands were cold, but my voice was calm. I can't study something I don't believe in. I've started my own project. I'm building a platform to help artisans sell online. My mother gave a half-scoff, half-pitying smile. So you're planning to make a living building websites for scarf weavers? I turned to my father. His anger was gone. Now his eyes were cold. Empty. If you reject tradition, don't call this house your home, he said slowly. Like each word cut a deeper line across the blood that once connected us. I had to wrap my laptop in a hoodie to keep it dry. No one saw me out. I left with a small suitcase, a backpack, an old laptop, and $230 in a savings account hidden under my best friend's name. The bus stop was 8 blocks from our house. I pulled my suitcase through puddles, past the streets I used to bike to elementary school, past the bakery where Dad used to buy milk bread every Sunday. No one in town knew I'd just been disowned. I arrived in Portland on a summer night, stayed temporarily in a third-floor room of an old building a high school friend recommended. Moldy walls, flickering outlets, shared bathroom. But it was the first place I lived under a name I chose. No report cards, no Wells dragging behind like both a title and a chain. Every morning I woke up early and made coffee with a second-hand machine that still smelled like old plastic. Then sat at my desk, a scratched wooden table by the window overlooking the neighbor's roof. I opened Artisan Link, wrote code, sent pitches, called small workshops, and got rejected over and over again. Some days I had to choose between recharging my phone or buying a sandwich. I once burst into tears when my laptop wouldn't turn on after 3 tries. But I eventually got it to boot by removing the battery cover and fixing it with a bobby pin. The screen lit up in the dark, and the same thought kept echoing. If no one will give me a chance, I'll build a world where I'm allowed to exist. In the 3rd month after officially leaving home, I got a LinkedIn message from a man named Kevin Halter, introducing himself as an angel investor who had worked with several tech startups in Seattle. His profile looked polished, Stanford graduate, photos with well-known CEOs, and a headline that read, "Advisor to Early Stage Founders." He said my project, Artisan Link, had potential and he was ready to invest $20,000 if I could prove commitment by transferring a legal advisory deposit into a shared account. I didn't question it. When you've lived your life under doubt, you tend to cling to anyone who believes in you, even if it's through a screen. I transferred $1,500, my entire savings. 3 days later, the account vanished, the phone number stopped working, emails bounced, and I realized I'd lost everything. I sat frozen on the living room floor, still gripping the computer mouse, even though the laptop had long powered off. That same week, my landlord knocked at 7 a.m. "Ruby, we need to talk." I opened the door in old pajamas, hair a tangled mess. "I'll give you 10 more days. But after that, if there's no payment, I'll have to terminate the lease." "I'm sorry, sweetheart." The apartment was over 200 square feet, gray-painted walls, peeling wood floors. I once thought it was a humble beginning. Now, it felt like a trap, where everything, my dreams, my faith, even myself, was being slowly crushed. I didn't talk to anyone for a week. No emails, no calls. Didn't even look out the window. One day, I stood too long in front of the open gas burner until my head spun from hunger and exhaustion, nearly collapsing to the floor. I thought, maybe my father was right. Maybe I was nothing more than a neighborhood computer repair girl. That night, as I drifted off at my desk in a half-sleep state, the laptop screen lit up with the familiar notification sound. I clicked into my inbox and saw a name I didn't recognize. Greta Chapman. Subject, "Thank you," from a tiny soap shop in Montana. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. But I paused. "Dear Ruby, you don't know me, and we've never spoken. But the website you built for my soap shop, simple layout, clear pictures, easy-to-use cart, kept me from shutting down after 42 years. Last week, a customer from Arizona ordered 12 lavender bars online. This week, someone from Utah. The orders aren't many, but they're enough to pay this month's utility bills. I don't have much to give in return, but if you ever need a place to stay in the northern mountains, my home is always open." I read every line slowly. My eyes blurred. Something inside me went still, as if a child who had been forgotten suddenly heard someone say her name after all these years. I pulled the laptop closer, opened Artisan Link, which had only 3 logged-in users the entire month. Greta was one of them. I opened the order stats. 1 soap order, 12 bars, paid via PayPal, shipped to Arizona. The simple interface I had designed in the middle of the night had actually connected 2 people. A quiet ripple, a single connection, 1 click that mattered but gave me 1 reason to believe. Even the smallest thing I built could still make a difference. I didn't rename the project for inspiration. I renamed it to survive. Artisan Link was my first passion project, but it was fragile. Too easy to dismiss, just like I had been. After Greta's email, I wasn't determined to rebuild. I had to lay a foundation strong enough that no one could ignore it. Not even my own family. I named the rebirth project Forge Logic. Forge, because I believed artisans were forging every day, in tiny workshops, with calloused hands, creating things you'd never find in a supermarket. Logic, because if the world wouldn't understand them with heart, I'd make sure they were understood through data. 1 click, 1 report, 1 order automatically processed. I didn't have the money to hire a team, but I had a network, and once again, the internet sent me the right stranger at the right time. Levi Brooks. I met Levi in an open-source programming forum. His avatar was just a white fox. He replied lightning fast, wrote clean code. I honestly thought I was chatting with an AI. When I messaged, "I'm building a system to help small shops manage orders, but I have almost no resources. Can you offer advice?" Levi replied with 3 words. Send the repo. An hour later, Levi opened a pull request that completely refactored my order system, added security logs, and even included a simple error prediction module. I stared at his code like I was seeing someone speak a language I knew all my life, but no one had ever spoken to me in it before. We started chatting on Slack, then Zoom, then met for the first time at a cafe in Beaverton. Levi was quiet, curly-haired, wore an old hoodie and round glasses. His voice was steady, like anything could be explained with enough logic and time. Amazon let me go after I reported my manager for selling internal project data to third parties. The lawsuit's going nowhere, and I'm basically blacklisted from the whole industry. I paused for a moment. So what are you doing now? I'm writing tools for small sellers to build their own CRMs, and if anyone's trying to fight big systems with simple tools, I'm in. We shook hands. No contract. No equity terms. ForgeLogic was rebuilt from scratch with one rule. It had to work on slow internet, old devices, and outdated operating systems. Because most artisans we served didn't have MacBooks or gigabit fiber. They used old Androids, logged in when they could find free Wi-Fi, and shipped goods in reused cardboard boxes. We tested the system in a public library parking lot, the only place with strong free Wi-Fi nearby. Levi worked from a van converted into a mobile office. I set up a foldable table in the backyard of my rental, running extension cords around the legs because the outlet sparked. On rainy days, I'd cover the laptop with plastic sheets and use a storage bin as a roof. It took us 6 months to reach a stable version. Not beautiful, not fancy, but it worked, and users understood it. Our first ForgeLogic customer was a small tailoring shop in Spokane, Washington. The owner's name was Melinda. She messaged, "I don't know what software is, but if this thing helps me stop mixing up orders, I'm all for it." 3 weeks later, Melinda's revenue had grown by 40%. Orders were on time, customers returned. She sent me a handmade thread box embroidered with my name on the fabric. For Ruby, who brought logic into my chaos. We didn't advertise, didn't go to press, didn't show up anywhere journalists might be. I created a fake profile under the name R. Lane to sign contracts, buy domains, pay for hosting, and manage Stripe accounts. My name, Ruby Wells, disappeared completely from every transaction. I didn't want anyone to trace it back. Didn't want my parents, my brother, the neighbors, or old teachers to know what I was doing, because part of me still feared that if they found out, they'd invalidate it all again. I chose to stay anonymous because I needed a quiet enough space to grow without being dragged back. After 2 years, ForgeLogic was operating in 3 states. We served over 80 small businesses, mostly pottery shops, woodwork shops, candle farms, and family-run tailoring studios. They didn't need to know who was behind it. They needed software that ran smoothly and didn't drive them crazy. For the first time in my life, I felt useful. Without having to wear formal clothes, hold a speech, or prove anything to them. I couldn't say exactly when my family began to unravel from the inside. Maybe it was the day I walked out of that house and never looked back. Or maybe it started long before. When they chose to place every hope on a son who nodded at the right moments, instead of a daughter who asked too many questions. Mason officially took over Wells & Co. in the 3rd year after I left. They held a grand ceremony, complete with a local news feature titled, "The 5th Generation Carries the Torch." The photos showed Mason standing in front of lacquered, handcrafted products, dressed sharply in a suit, holding a champagne glass. My mother sat beside him, eyes beaming with pride, and my father, though well into his 60s, stood in the back, a living emblem of heritage and legacy. But 2 years later, the first messages about the company's troubles started coming in, not from them, but from artisans who had once worked with Wells & Co. They're starting to sell through Chinese middlemen, cutting out almost all domestic workshops. My batch of ceramics got rejected because it didn't meet international market trends. Mason doesn't listen to anyone anymore. Everything is decided by some external strategy team. I read quietly and didn't respond. I had chosen my path. and so had they. But the real blow came on a Monday afternoon. Rachel, my head of communications, walked into the meeting room with an unusual expression. "You need to see this," she said, placing an iPad in front of me. The screen displayed a leaked internal document from the Oregon State Tax Bureau. Wells & Co. was under investigation for illegally funneling profits through shell intermediaries in Guangzhou and Tianjin. I read each line slowly. At the bottom, in small handwritten script, was the name. Foreign Partner, Hongshin Resources, Ltd. That's the name that tried to buy ForgeLogic last year, remember? We declined the offer because we couldn't verify their real ownership structure. Levi walked in at that moment, skimmed the screen, and frowned slightly. "You know Wells & Co. is the primary supplier for Kraft North, right? Kraft North was one of the largest retail chains using our platform. If their supplier was under investigation, the entire system would be subject to audits. And ForgeLogic, though uninvolved, would still be caught in the ripple. We spent 3 days auditing all related data. The conclusion was clear. Wells & Co. had quietly shifted part of their orders from domestic artisans to offshore manufacturers, then labeled the products as handmade in Oregon and doubled the price. Worse, there was evidence Mason knew about it. On the 4th day after the leak, I got a call from an unknown number. "Hello? I'm Cliff Martin, legal counsel for Wells & Co. We understand FLS Holdings is looking to invest in craft businesses in the Northwest. Wells & Co. would be honored to present a proposal for collaboration." FLS Holdings was the strategic investment firm Rachel and I had set up the previous year under ForgeLogic's ownership, to access the supply chain from the root level. We used to joke, if the day ever comes when Wells needs saving, let them come to us. And now they had, without the slightest idea who they were reaching out to. That evening, I sat alone in my office, dim light casting shadows over old framed photos. Me as a child behind the pottery counter, hands covered in clay, grinning brightly. My father stood in the distance, arms folded, watching, but not smiling. I still remembered that look. A few days later, an official invitation was sent to FLS Holdings. Wells & Co. would like to present a restructuring and investment proposal at the Portland headquarters, 10 a.m. next Friday. Rachel brought the packet and set it on my desk. "Who do you want to represent FLS that day?" "Oh, no." Levi turned, slightly stunned. "You sure?" "They want to meet the strategic investor. I'll show them who's really holding the reins." The conference room on the 18th floor of Wells & Co. had a different air that morning. No ceremonial music, like the ones I heard growing up, seated backstage while my father gave speeches. No polished brass nameplates or neatly stacked gift boxes. Only tense faces, cautious eyes, and a projector already displaying the most recent quarter's cash flow deficits. I arrived right on time. The young assistant by the door glanced me up and down. Sand-colored suit, low ponytail, thin-rimmed glasses. She didn't recognize me. "I'm the representative for FLS Holdings. I have an appointment with Mason Wells." Inside, conversation slowed as I pushed the door open. The first eyes I met were my mother's. Susan Wells, sitting upright, hands clasped, face lined with restrained anxiety. Her brows furrowed instantly, as if her memory scrambled to match the familiar image appearing before her. Next was my father, Robert. He sat far across the table, hair almost completely white, face more hollow than I remembered. In front of him sat a fountain pen, identical to the one he once used to sign the dismissal of our first pottery worker when I still lived at home. And finally Mason. He stood as he saw me, eyes widening, hands still hovering over the restructuring proposal. "Movie?" I pulled out a chair, placed the folder on the table. "Hello? It's been a while." My mother covered her mouth. My father leaned forward, his gaze adrift, like someone winded by a gut punch. I sat down and opened the first folder. "This is FLS Holdings' investment proposal. A $1 million support package over 3 phases, on the condition that Wells & Co. terminates all outsourcing contracts in China, and restores 60% of orders to domestic workshops in the first year. I slid out the second folder. This is the equity transfer agreement. Control will be restructured, with 30% allocated to the artisans who lost contracts during the company's industrial policy shift 3 years ago. I looked at Mason. I know what you're thinking, that I came back for revenge. But I don't need to get back at anyone. I'm here to fix what you all broke. Mason slammed his hand on the table. What the hell is this? You're my sister. You have no right to walk in here making demands. You're right. Being your sister gives me no right. But as the CEO of Forge Logic, the company that owns FLS Holdings, I have every right to decide whether or not you still own Wells & Co. tomorrow. My father cleared his throat, his voice rough. Ruby, this is a family legacy. You're destroying what 5 generations built. I'm not destroying anything, Dad. I'm trying to save what's left. The part you forgot a long time ago. The real craftsmen, the real hands, and the name Wells that once made them proud. My mother whispered. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Why show up like this? Because when I spoke at 18, you called me ungrateful. When I acted, Dad called me a traitor to tradition. I don't need permission anymore. I pushed both folders toward Mason. 2 options. 1, we collaborate, restore Wells & Co. with the people who built it. Or 2, watch it collapse entirely. But this time, no one's bailing you out. Mason clenched his jaw. What do you want from this? Fame? Money? An apology? I want to return a brand to what it truly is. No name is noble enough to stand on lies. Mason knocked the second folder off the table but didn't touch the first. My parents remained silent, as if clinging to memories that no longer matched reality. The room fell still, the projector humming softly behind us. Mason stared at me, hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. You're not a Wells. You're a disgrace to your bloodline. His voice wasn't loud, but loud enough for everyone to hear. I didn't flinch. No one reacted. Not a single lawyer from Wells & Co. spoke up. I leaned toward my own attorney and quietly signed the restructuring agreement. Not the control transfer, but the funding plan for the workshops, previously cut off. Mason's name wasn't on the capital recipient list. No executive seat was reserved for him. And most importantly, FLS wasn't buying the whole company. We chose to restructure from within, cut the outdated leadership, preserve the local supply chain, and allocate shares to artisans, just as promised. I stood, carefully stacked the documents, and slid my pen into the pocket of my blazer. Mason remained standing, his face a mix of rage and disbelief, as if unable to accept that the girl he once called the stain of the family had done this. My father hadn't spoken a word the entire meeting, once a hardline leader who never showed weakness. Now, in his eyes, I saw no power, only emptiness. I turned and walked out. My heels echoed steadily across the cold stone floor. The glass door down the hallway glowed softly under Portland's misty noon light. I hadn't reached the elevator when a voice called from behind. My mother. Her voice, raspy and urgent. Ruby, wait, please. She ran after me, still holding my wrist the way she used to, as if afraid I might slip away like smoke. What about your father's medical bills? She asked, eyes wide with panic. The insurance refused coverage. The doctor says he needs special care. We can't afford it. You know he was never easy, but... Are you really this cold? I looked down at her hand gripping mine. That feeling. Warm, familiar, but strangely freezing. A hand that once let go of me when I begged for the right to choose my own life. I gently pulled away. Forge Logic doesn't invest in places that don't respect the person leading it. My mother's eyes widened, vacant, but she didn't let go. But you're part of that place. No matter what happened, it's still family. Family isn't where you have to bow your head to be allowed to stay. It's where people choose not to hurt each other. even when they don't understand. She stood still, like stone, nothing left to grasp. I stepped into the elevator without looking back. The doors closed behind me with a soft ding, splitting two worlds in half. One held together by brittle pride, the other built from everything I was once rejected for. I used to think being heard meant sacrificing everything, but in the end, the only thing I ever needed from them was silence at the right time. I moved to Austin on a crisp early fall morning. The sky was clear, the sunlight soft, just enough to make the old oak trees along Barton Springs shimmer like they were celebrating someone who had just left an old life behind. I didn't come to run away, but to start a new version of Forge Logic. One without aliases, no more borrowed names, and no more limits from the past. The new office was on the 4th floor of a converted print shop. The red brick walls were left exposed, tall windows opened to a rooftop garden, and in the corner stood a large wooden board with a sentence I'd written in chalk. "We build good things, no permission needed." I no longer avoided lights or cameras. My name, Ruby Lawson, appeared for the first time on the company's official website as founder, with no footnotes, no disclaimers. I began mentoring with Build Her, a program for young women without college degrees but with promising business ideas. Every Monday, I sat in a round room where women in their 20s raised their hands to ask the questions I used to fumble through in the dark. How do you raise capital when you don't know anyone? How do you write a product when no one believes you understand the tech? How do you keep going when everyone around you insists you're on the wrong path? I didn't teach them how to be CEOs. I shared what I'd learned in the slowest, most honest way I could. One late afternoon, after the final fall session, I received an interview request from an independent tech journal. The sender was Caleb Fisher, a journalist known for his popular series on anonymous founders behind local tech ecosystems. I was going to decline, but then I noticed one line in the email. "I believe Forge Logic's order writing logic resembles a repo you posted on GitHub back in 2015. If I'm right, I owe you a conversation." I laughed out loud. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop by Ladybird Lake. Caleb arrived on time, wearing rolled-up sleeves and old canvas shoes, clean but worn. He had a warm smile and a handshake that wasn't rushed, like greeting someone he already understood, even without having met. "So, you were Arlene?" he asked as soon as we sat down. "And you're the only one who ever debugged that broken loop in under 6 minutes." Caleb laughed. "I had a hunch from the queue down pattern, the way you used temporary arrays and manual state swaps. Wasn't like anyone else's style. So, what are you planning to write about me?" He tilted his head genuinely. "This isn't for a story. I simply want to know, after everything, what are you still writing?" I didn't answer right away. That question wasn't for the press. It was for someone who knew what it felt like to be rejected by the world and still choose to stay. We met again a few times after that. No notebooks, no recordings. Sometimes at builder showcases, sometimes just walking through Zilker Park with iced tea and an old song playing. Caleb never asked about my past unless I brought it up. He wasn't curious in the wrong ways, and he didn't gush when he found out I'd signed million-dollar contracts from a rundown room in Portland. Once, while we sat together on the stone bridge at South Congress, Caleb said quietly, "You're the only person I know who could build a platform that impacts thousands and stay hidden for years, like it was some secret." Maybe, because I used to think if people knew, they'd try to make me become someone else again. He looked at me, not probing. "And now?" I looked out at the lake, reflecting the sunset. "Now I know. Anyone who doesn't accept who I really am doesn't deserve to be in any version of me." Caleb didn't say anything else. He gently touched the back of my hand, just enough to say something without saying it. No pressure, no questions. Just presence. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel the need to brace myself. The early summer sun in Texas poured over the wide glass panes of our new building like warm honey. Forge Logic Campus officially opened with steady applause from more than 200 guests, artisans from 30 states, nonprofit partners, core team members, and young women from Build Her I'd mentored over the past 2 years. The small stage sat right in the courtyard, beneath the branches of an old oak tree we decided to keep when designing the space. Not for feng shui, not for aesthetics, but because something about that mossy trunk reminded me of patience. How some things need decades of quiet rooting before they're strong enough for others to lean on. I stepped up to the podium. No notes, no teleprompter. Everyone fell silent. I looked at the front row. Rachel, Levi, and even Jared were there. Caleb nearby, arms crossed, eyes soft. And then, at the very end of the row, I saw my mother. Susan Wells sat quietly, unannounced, no name tag. She wore a cream linen blouse, no makeup, and her eyes lifted toward me. With no defensiveness. Not pride. Not disappointment. Just one thing. The silence of someone finally realizing she had never truly understood her own daughter. I took a deep breath, then spoke. We spent years in silence, not because I had nothing to share, but because I was taught that if you didn't fit the mold, you shouldn't speak at all. I paused, looking at the group of young women taking notes in the back. But one thing I've learned, stay silent long enough and you'll start to believe you're not worthy. And when you realize that's a lie, you have two choices. Go back and beg to be accepted, or build a world where acceptance isn't the price of existence. I looked toward Caleb. I didn't create Forge Logic to be called successful. I didn't walk into boardrooms of people who once rejected me to beat them. I did all of this because I needed to live true, live whole, and live free, even if no one clapped for it. Applause broke out, soft at first, then rippling through the courtyard. Not loud, not performative, but deep, quiet recognition from those who had once lived in that liminal space between valued and forgotten. I bowed and stepped down from the stage, walking past the rows of seats. As I passed my mother, I didn't stop. But for a split second, our eyes met. She was crying. Tears fell slowly, like she was realizing, for the first time, that not understanding someone could also be a form of loss. Caleb stepped beside me, handing me a bottle of water. I noticed your hand shaking a little, but no one else did. You did? Yeah. But I think it made the speech feel even more real. We walked to the small tech showcase set up in the back courtyard, not fancy booths with LED lights or touchscreen displays, just simple wooden tables where young creators presented their first projects, still finding their voices but full of passion. A 14-year-old named Elijah stood beside an old laptop, explaining his software to help his grandmother, who makes handmade jam, manage orders through Facebook without needing Excel. His voice trembled, face flushed. I leaned in, listening to every word until he finished. I think your grandma would be really proud, I said. Elijah looked up, eyes shining. Caleb stood behind me, his hand resting gently on my back, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. I looked around. So many faces learning to believe in themselves. People once overlooked for not having degrees, for not speaking the right way, for not knocking on the right doors. I had been one of them. And now, I was here. Not to fix the past, but to build the present. Beside those who had believed in me from the beginning. No titles, no honors, only truth and the freedom to choose. Have you ever had to walk alone simply because you chose a different path than what your family expected? Have you ever been called a traitor just for not following the blueprint everyone else thought was right? I don't know where you are in your journey. Maybe you're quietly trying every day and no one sees it. Maybe you're standing between loyalty and yourself. If any part of my story touched something in you, leave a comment. It doesn't have to be long. just honest, because sometimes just knowing we're not the only ones who've been through it can begin to heal something that's been aching in silence. And if you'd like to keep hearing stories about family, choice, and the quiet courage to live on your own terms, hit follow.